Get ready for a hair-raising story. In a quiet neighborhood of a small town, a boy named Samuel receives a birthday present that will change his life forever. An ancient and sinister doll named Damien is about to turn his reality into a terrifying nightmare. Once upon a time, in a quiet neighborhood of a small town, there lived a boy named Samuel. He was an ordinary boy, full of energy and imagination, like any child his age. Samuel had just turned 8, and to celebrate, he had a birthday party filled with balloons, cake, and presents. Among all the toys he received, there was a special gift sent by a distant relative who was always traveling around the world. When Samuel tore off the wrapping paper, he revealed a strange and somewhat antiquated doll named Damien. Unlike the other bright and colorful toys, Damien was made of an old material with an expression that seemed almost alive. Damien's eyes seemed to follow him wherever he went in the room. There was something unsettling about that expression. His appearance was disturbing, with meticulously detailed clothes and a smile that seemed to stretch a bit too far. Samuel's parents found the doll charmingly vintage, a rarity that, according to the relative, had been found in a small, mysterious antique shop. They placed it on the shelf in Samuel's room so he could look at Damien while he slept. That night, as Samuel was about to close his eyes, he swore he heard a whisper, a low, indistinct sound like someone was speaking right next to his ear. He thought it was just his imagination running wild after an exciting day. However, as he looked at Damien, right there on the shelf, he could swear he saw the doll move slightly. Just a small movement, like a twitch, but enough to make the boy's heart race and a chill run down his spine. Samuel pulled the covers up to his chin, not taking his eyes off Damien. But eventually, fatigue went over, and he finally fell asleep with the unsettling feeling that he wasn't alone in the room. The next morning, Samuel found Damien on the floor, lying face down, despite having been carefully placed on the shelf. His parents smiled and said it must have been the wind or a sudden movement during the night. But Samuel knew it wasn't the wind. He was beginning to feel that something was very wrong with that doll. In the nights that followed, the strange events began to occur more frequently. Samuel could barely sleep, always alert to any sound or movement in the room. The small clock on the nightstand seemed to tick louder than usual, and the shadows in the room moved in a strange way, as if dancing to a macabre melody. One night, while Samuel was trying to close his eyes and forget the fear, he heard a distinct sound coming from the floor of his room, a slight dragging, as if someone were walking stealthily. His eyes widened and his heart began to beat faster. He swallowed hard, trying to calm himself. It must be his imagination, just that. But then, the moonlight streaming through the window reflected something shiny on the floor. Samuel looked and saw Damien off the shelf, near the foot of his bed. The doll was positioned in a way that made it seem like it was looking directly at him. Samuel could almost swear that the toy's lips moved into a smile. The next day, Samuel, now pale from exhaustion and fear, told his parents everything. They, however, laughed and said it was normal for boys his age to imagine such things, especially after such an exciting birthday. His father took Damien and put him back on the shelf, adjusting him lovingly. One night, after he was sent to bed, Samuel heard a giggle. A low, sinister giggle that echoed through the darkness. He curled up under the covers, his eyes wide open staring at the shelf where Damien was. That same night, even stranger things began to happen. Objects in the room started moving in ways that defied logic. The lamp next to his bed began flickering for no reason, and the toys on the floor would change places when no one was around. Electronic games would turn on by themselves, emitting eerie sounds that cut through the silence of the night. One morning, upon waking, Samuel found muddy footprints on the floor of his room, leading up to his bed. He showed his parents, but they just exchanged glances, shaking their heads, believing that Samuel himself was playing a prank. The situation became untenable when, on a rainy afternoon, Samuel was playing in his room with Damien for a few hours alone, while his parents went shopping. The boy was tired, but he didn't want to let the doll out of his sight. He felt that every time he blinked or looked away, Damien moved a fraction of a second. The tension grew with every minute, and Samuel knew that something terrible was trapped in that doll. A force he couldn't explain, a presence that grew stronger each day. Then, that afternoon, he saw Damien slowly turn his head to look directly into his eyes and whisper in a chilling voice, "Let's play, Samuel." Frozen with fear and not knowing what to do, Samuel ran out of the room, leaving behind the doll that now seemed more alive than ever. Something was very wrong, and he knew that none of what was happening was the product of his childish imagination. Samuel ran out of the room and down the stairs, his heart pounding. He tried to find his parents, but the house was eerily silent. They hadn't returned from shopping yet. Breathing heavily, he hid in the kitchen pantry, hoping the strange nightmare would end. While he was hiding, he began to hear light, delicate footsteps, as if tiny feet were walking down the hallway. With each approaching step, his heart beat faster. The sound stopped right in front of the pantry. He could see the handle turning slowly, but before the door opened completely, he heard the key turning in the front door lock. His parents had returned. His father entered the kitchen and found Samuel, sweating and trembling. "What happened, son?" he asked. Samuel, still in shock, tried to explain, but his parents seemed more confused and worried about his reaction than about believing his words. They decided to have Samuel sleep in their room that night, thinking he might be having nightmares or an anxiety attack. During the night, however, strange noises echoed through the house. Doors creaked, light footsteps were heard, and whispers snaked through the hallways. Samuel, lying between his parents, could hardly close his eyes. He knew Damien was somewhere in the house, and he felt that the doll wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. The next morning, the house was in disarray. Broken objects, displaced furniture, and in the center of the living room, Damien sat with the same sinister smile on his face. This time, Samuel's father couldn't ignore the obvious. Muddy footprints were everywhere, leading from the living room to Samuel's room. Determined to solve the problem, his father grabbed Damien and, without a second thought, threw the doll in the trash, hoping that would end the inexplicable events. During the day, everything seemed back to normal. But at night, things took an even darker turn. Samuel woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a chill down his spine. When he turned, he saw something that froze his blood. Damien was sitting in the chair in his room, looking directly at him. It was impossible. The doll had been thrown away. Once again, the soft, sinister voice whispered, "You can't get rid of me that easily." Samuel, the boy, started screaming, waking his parents who, upon entering the room and seeing Damien back, finally believed that something supernatural was happening. Desperate, they decided to act quickly. They took Damien, went to the backyard, and with a sense of urgency never felt before, began digging a deep hole in the garden. They buried the doll, believing that this time, the malevolent entity would be trapped forever. But things are rarely that simple. As the days passed, Samuel began to see Damien in his dreams, always with that disturbing smile. At night, the sounds of digging and low giggles came from the garden. Something was still there, waiting for the right moment to return. The days passed slowly, laden with a heavy sense of apprehension. Samuel tried to lead a normal life, but the constant nightmares and the feeling of being watched followed him like a shadow. At night, the noises from the garden continued, and the dreams of Damien became increasingly vivid. One night, Samuel woke up in a cold sweat after a terrible nightmare where Damien was dragging him into a dark hole. Determined to end this once and for all, he grabbed a flashlight and quietly left the house, determined to confront his fear. He walked to the spot where they had buried Damien. The garden seemed more sinister in the dim light of the flashlight, each sound of branches or leaves becoming a threatening noise. When he reached the spot, Samuel saw something that chilled his blood. The hole was open, and Damien was no longer there. Feeling a growing desperation, he ran back to the house, only to find his parents awake and worried about his absence. Trembling, he told them about the empty hole. His parents, now also terrified, decided they needed outside help. The next day, they called in a specialist in paranormal phenomena. The man, old and serious, listened attentively to the family's story. After inspecting the house and the garden, he made an unsettling revelation. Damien was not just a doll. Something very old and malevolent had found a way to attach itself to the toy, an entity that fed on fear and anguish. The specialist suggested a purification ritual to try and expel the entity and free Damien from its malevolent influence. They prepared a circle in the backyard with salt and candles, meticulously following the specialist's instructions. At night, as they performed the ritual, the atmosphere around the house seemed to become even more charged and oppressive. Samuel, at the center of the circle, held Damien while the specialist recited ancient and powerful words. The candles flickered, and the air seemed to vibrate with an invisible force. Suddenly, Damien began to writhe in his hands, emitting a horrible sound, a scream of pure evil. The circle of salt and light seemed to contain the entity for a moment, but then an explosion of energy threw everyone back. Damien fell to the middle of the circle, inert. For a moment, everything was silent. The family watched, in a state of shock, trying to understand if the ritual had worked. But then, slowly and deliberately, Damien stood up in the middle of the circle, his eyes flashing with a sinister red light. The doll began to laugh, a laugh that echoed in the very depths of terror. "You really think you can get rid of me so easily?" he hissed. The specialist, apparently defeated, murmured for the family to run. Without looking back, they ran back to the house and locked all the doors. They could still hear Damien's laughter outside, mingling with the wind that seemed to whisper threats. The family was exhausted, but they knew it wasn't over yet. They would have to find a definitive solution, or live forever under the shadow of that indescribable terror. As they huddled together in the living room, seeking comfort from one another, the specialist approached and said in a low voice, "There is still one last hope, but it is risky. We need to find the origin of the entity and confront it directly. Only then can we have a chance to free Damien and end this nightmare." And so, determination slowly began to replace despair. They had no other choice. They needed to prepare for the final and decisive battle against the ancient evil inhabiting Damien. With the decision made, Samuel and his family, along with the specialist, began to prepare for the final battle. The specialist explained that the entity possessing Damien was known as a vengeful spirit, bound to the doll due to an ancient ritual performed by a practitioner of dark magic long ago. To confront the entity and destroy it once and for all, they would have to travel to the site of the original ritual, an old forest a few hours away. It was there that the entity had been originally summoned, and it was there that they could seal it forever. Armed with protective items and sacred ammunition, they set out at dusk, hoping to catch the entity off guard. The forest where the original ritual had been performed was dense and dark, a place that seemed to avoid sunlight and carried an aura of despair. When they arrived at the designated spot, a circle of ancient stones and an altar covered in arcane symbols, they felt the air heavy with a malevolent presence. The specialist prepared a new protective circle and instructed the family to stay calm, no matter what happened. They placed Damien in the center of the circle, and the specialist began chanting even more powerful incantations, invoking ancient forces to confront the entity. The temperature around them dropped drastically, and a thick mist began to form, obscuring their vision. Suddenly, Damien began to writhe violently again, emitting sharp screams. Samuel felt a wave of fear but remained firm, holding onto a protective amulet the specialist had given him. The mist condensed into an indistinct figure, a shadow with glowing red eyes that seemed to feed on the air around it. "You think you can defeat me?" The entity hissed through Damien. "I am eternal, and you are just mortals." But the specialist did not falter. He continued the ritual, the energy of his words increasing with each syllable. Samuel and his parents formed a circle, holding hands, channeling their hopes and strength into the critical moment. The entity tried to break through the salt barrier, but was repelled by a wave of bright energy. The confrontation intensified. Damien floated in the air, enveloped in a sinister light, while the entity desperately tried to break free. The specialist then pulled out an older talisman, infused with the power of past generations, and placed it on the doll's chest. The entity screamed in rage and pain. "Now, Samuel, finish the ritual," the specialist shouted. With trembling but steady hands, Samuel took a consecrated dagger and pressed it against Damien's body. "I banish you, evil spirit. Return to the abyss from which you came." The light pulsed violently, illuminating the entire forest. The entity fought to remain, but Samuel's words, backed by the ritual's power, were irresistible. With a final scream, the malevolent presence was sucked into the talisman, which glowed intensely before shattering into pieces. Damien fell to the ground, inert, devoid of energy or malice. The specialist collapsed from exhaustion, but was satisfied. Samuel and his family hugged, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They felt a peace they hadn't known for a long time. When they returned home, they buried Damien's remains and the talisman fragments in a sacred place, knowing that the malignancy would never rise again. Their house was finally at peace. The nights became quiet again, and Samuel, although emotionally scarred, knew he had faced and conquered his greatest fear. Now he could begin to rebuild his life, free from the shadows that had once haunted him. And as the scars of the experience slowly healed, one thing became clear. No matter how terrifying evil may be, the courage and unity of a family have the power to overcome it. Samuel's life and that of his family gradually began to return to normal. The emotional scars, though deep, started to heal with time and mutual support. The house, once a stage for terrifying supernatural events, now felt like a sanctuary of tranquility. Samuel's nightmares diminished until they became rare, and when they did occur, he knew how to handle them. The family dedicated themselves to creating new, happy memories, replacing the old shadows with the light of love and unity. One day, while playing in the yard, Samuel found a small box buried near the spot where Damien had been defeated. The box was dusty and looked old. Curiously, he opened it and found an old diary and some yellowed letters. The diary belonged to the dark magic practitioner who had created Damien. Samuel brought the diary to his parents, and together, they decided to read it. They discovered that the practitioner, named Elias, had been a researcher obsessed with the occult. His notes revealed the process of creating Damien and how he had transferred part of his own essence into the doll, hoping to achieve immortality. The last entry in the diary was disturbing. "If this diary is found, know that it is only the beginning. My essence lives beyond this doll, waiting for the opportunity to resurface." The family was chilled by the reading, but the paranormal specialist, who still kept in touch with them, assured them that the entity had been sealed definitively. Even so, he recommended they keep the documents in a safe place, as a constant reminder that evil can resurface, but vigilance and unity are the best defense. Years passed, and Samuel grew up, carrying with him the lessons learned from that dark encounter. He became a strong and courageous young man, determined to use his experience to help others. He began to study more about the occult and supernatural forces, not out of morbid curiosity, but to ensure that no one else would have to go through what he and his family had endured. He formed a small support group for people facing paranormal phenomena, helping them find peace and safety. One day, he received a letter from a stranger, saying that something similar had begun to happen in a distant town. He felt a chill as he read the descriptions that reminded him of the early signs of Damien's presence. He gathered his group and set out to help this new family, determined to prevent the darkness from spreading again. As they prepared for the new journey, Samuel looked up at the starry sky and made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would protect the innocent from the shadows. Samuel's group arrived at the distant town, a quaint village now disturbed by supernatural events. The villagers' stories were eerily familiar, objects moving on their own, whispers in the night, and unsettling dreams of a dark figure. Samuel led his team in a careful investigation, interviewing residents and inspecting sites of paranormal activity. The evidence pointed to an old house on the outskirts of the village, an abandoned place overgrown with vegetation. Upon entering the house, the oppressive atmosphere was immediately palpable. It felt as if time had stopped there, and a disquieting feeling of being watched followed them with every step. In the basement, they found signs of ancient rituals similar to those used to seal Damien. They spent hours studying the symbols and translating the deteriorated texts on the walls. Samuel quickly recognized notes similar to those in Elias's diary, confirming his suspicions that the evil was manifesting again. As they prepared the purification ritual, a flash of light revealed a disturbing discovery: another doll resembling Damien, but with even more sin. Placing the doll in the center of the protection circle, Samuel felt a sinister presence engulf them. Just like before, he knew they could not show fear. The group chanted the protection incantations, their voices merging into a powerful force. The doll began to writhe horribly, its eyes glowing with the same malevolent red light Samuel knew well. The entity resisted fiercely, but this time Samuel was more prepared, armed with more knowledge and a united, confident team. The energy in the basement intensified, with wind sweeping papers and objects around. The dark figure tried to break through the circle, but was repelled once again. Samuel, holding the consecrated dagger, stared down the entity and declared, "You have no power here. Your essence will be sealed forever." With one final, powerful recitation, he plunged the dagger into the doll. The entity let out a terrible scream, echoing off the walls of the house as the red light faded and extinguished. Finally, everything went silent. The basement fell eerily quiet, and the doll's body collapsed to the ground, inert. Samuel dropped to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. The group embraced in silent relief, knowing they had won another battle against the forces of evil. They took the doll and the fragments of the symbols to a sacred site, once again performing the burial and protection ritual. The village, relieved, slowly returned to normal, with the residents resuming their lives without the constant fear. Proud of their victory, Samuel knew the fight against the shadows was ongoing. Each victory was just a step in his mission to protect the innocent. He kept a symbolic piece of the ritual fragments as a reminder of his mission and commitment. As his team headed home, Samuel looked to the horizon, knowing that wherever darkness emerged, he would be ready to face it with the same courage and determination. Samuel's name became synonymous with hope and protection for those living under the shadow of the supernatural. If this story has left you curious to learn more about Damien's mysteries and Samuel's supernatural battles, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Leave a like, hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our spine-chilling content, and share your theories and experiences in the comments below. See you in the next video.